The last thing I saw of the surface world was the foggy village, a huddle of salt-blasted roofs clinging to the cliff's edge, swallowed by a woolly shroud. The air, thick with the tang of brine and damp earth, clung to my coat, a final, fleeting caress before the plunge. My breath plumed white, momentary ghosts against the indifferent gray sky. I stood on the dock, the colossal submersible, the Abyssal Eye, groaning softly beside me, its metallic hide slick with sea spray. It was a beast of engineering, designed to defy the crushing maw of the deep, yet even its bulk felt fragile against the immensity I was about to enter. I was Marcus Blake, and my life had been a meticulous excavation of the unknown. From the fossilized imprints of primordial life in ancient seabed strata to the perplexing crystal formations found in meteorites, my hands had sought the silent whispers of creation. This mission, however, felt different. It hummed with a resonance that vibrated beyond geology, a deep, unsettling chord plucked from the very fabric of existence. His face, weathered by countless voyages, was a map of deep-sea pressures. I nodded, my gaze still fixed on the disappearing village. As I'll ever be. The hatch sealed with a pneumatic hiss, severing the last tether to the sun-drenched, breathable world. The air, recycled and sterile, tasted faintly of ozone and anticipation. I took my seat beside the chief engineer, a quiet woman with eyes that seemed to hold the weight of untold depths. Her fingers danced across a diagnostic panel, a ballet of calculated precision. The descent began, a slow, inexorable plunge into the black. Pressure alarms chirped a rhythmic lullaby as the hull groaned, protesting the increasing burden. The ocean, once a playful expanse, transformed into a monolithic entity, a liquid mountain pressing down with unimaginable force. Minutes stretched into hours, marked only by the submersible's rhythmic hum and the occasional crackle of static from the combs. We passed through zones of bioluminescence, fleeting galaxies of spectral light that swirled and vanished, brief, beautiful illusions in the endless night. These were the true denizens of the deep, indifferent to our presence, their lives unfolding in realms beyond human comprehension. Their silent ballet was a stark reminder of our trespass. Visual contact. I leaned forward, my breath catching. Triton Station. Its vast, dormant form loomed before us, a sleeping titan at the bottom of the world. It looked less like a scientific outpost and more like a sunken cathedral, its silent grandeur hinting at forgotten rituals. My scientific drive surged, a potent cocktail of excitement and trepidation. This was it. The place where the deep ocean met something else. Our mission, to reactivate Triton, to restore its power, to bring its dormant systems back to life. It was the reason Triton had been built in the first place, then abruptly evacuated decades ago. The captain, a stern woman with an unreadable gaze, had given me the briefing weeks ago, her voice low and grave. They found something, Marcus. Something that changed them. Not physically, but fundamentally. A truth, they called it, that the universe was never meant to share. That was the reveal, the unspoken core of our perilous undertaking. Not a monster, not a physical threat, but an ideological one. A truth. The very air around me, or perhaps it was just the recirculated cabin air, felt heavy, charged with the weight of that cosmic secret. We were not merely reactivating a station, we were waking a sleeping god, and I, Marcus Blake, was its unwitting acolyte. The Abyssal Eye's massive airlock hissed, a mechanical sigh against the crushing dark, as we docked with Triton Station. The ancient structure, a hulking shadow against the bioluminescent abyss, swallowed our lights whole. This was it. The place where absence took form, where the very air seemed to hum with forgotten secrets. Pressure equalization complete, the engineer's voice crackled, flat and detached over the calms. Even his usual boisterous tone was muted by Triton's presence. Opening inner hatch. A deep thrum vibrated through the deck plates, a resonance that felt less like machinery and more like the station itself drawing a slow, deliberate breath. The inner hatch slid open, revealing a cavernous entry bay. Dust motes, disturbed by our arrival, danced in the beam of my headlamp, a spectral ballet in the stagnant air. The place smelled of ozone, rust, and something else, a faint, metallic tang that tickled the back of my throat, an echo of forgotten purpose. "Stay sharp," the security chief rumbled, his heavy boots echoing as he stepped onto the station's deck. His assault rifle, a familiar weight in his hands, seemed almost insignificant against the vast, silent maw of Triton. "Sensors are mostly dead. We're running blind." I paid little mind to his warnings. My gaze swept across the derelict bay, past the skeletal remains of forgotten machinery, towards the deeper arteries of the station. This wasn't about physical threats. This was about the truth, the ideological weapon I felt stirring beneath the station's skin. We moved deeper, our headlamps carving shifting tunnels through the gloom. Corridors stretched, endless and identical, each door a sealed promise of further desolation. My thoughts began to fray at the edges, images unbidden flickering through my mind, not of the trench, but of something else. A low-lying mist, clinging to forgotten cobblestones. The vague outline of buildings, their edges softened by the perpetual shroud. The illusion was fleeting, a disorienting ripple in my perception, gone as quickly as it appeared, leaving behind only a faint tremor of unease. The engineer worked with quiet efficiency, bypassing rusted security panels, coaxing faint power from dormant conduits. Each click and whir of his tools felt like a sacrilege in the station's profound stillness. We passed through what must have been crew quarters, mess halls, and research labs, all frozen in time, coated in a fine silt that spoke of decades of neglect. A half-eaten meal still sat on a table in the mess, petrified. A single, overturned chair in a lab, as if someone had left in a hurry, or been taken. My internal navigation system, a subtle hum beneath my consciousness, pulsed with a faint, insistent thrum. Not a structural anomaly, nor a power signature, but something else, a resonance. A harmonic anomaly. It led me away from the main thoroughfares, down a narrow, forgotten maintenance shaft. "Marcus, where are you going?" The security chief's voice was sharp. The resonance grew stronger, a siren song in my mind. "There's something here. Something hidden." The shaft terminated at a reinforced bulkhead, unlike any other I had seen in the station. No controls, no visible seams. The metal shrieked, a tortured cry that echoed through the silent station, and for a moment, I imagined the ancient structure groaning in protest. Finally, a section of the bulkhead gave way, collapsing inward with a muffled clang. Beyond it lay a small, circular chamber, utterly devoid of the dust and decay that coated the rest of Triton. The air here was still, unnervingly fresh. It pulsed with a soft, internal luminescence, casting a gentle, ethereal glow that painted the chamber in shifting hues of indigo and violet. It was crystalline, yes, but its geometry defied explanation. Angles twisted where no angle should be, surfaces curved into impossible facets, and its overall form seemed to shift, subtly, impossibly, as my eyes tried to comprehend it. A cube that was also a sphere, a pyramid that contained an infinite regression of its own form. It was beautiful, terrifying, and utterly alien. I felt a pressure behind my eyes, a subtle warping of the space around me. The air itself seemed to vibrate with a silent frequency, filling my skull with a low hum that resonated with the burgeoning truth. The revelation. Not a physical threat, but a profound, unmaking understanding. I took a step closer, drawn by an irresistible pull, my reflection momentarily caught in one of its impossibly angled surfaces, a reflection that seemed to ripple, distort. A key to an indifferent cosmos, and to the unraveling of everything I thought I knew. The engineer, intrigued despite himself, brought his cutting torch to bear. Sparks rained down, brief constellations in the abyssal dark, as he meticulously carved an opening. The metal shrieked, a tortured cry that echoed through the silent station, and for a moment, I imagined the ancient structure itself protesting our intrusion. When the last seam gave way, the panel groaned, then fell inward with a heavy clang, revealing not the expected mechanism or data core, but a cavity, perfectly circular and unnaturally smooth. Within, cradled by unknown forces, floated an object. It was no larger than a human skull, yet it seemed to absorb the light, not reflect it. Its surface was obsidian, but not polished, rather, it was a topology of impossible angles and curves that defied understanding. There were no sharp edges, no discernible facets, only a continuous, flowing geometry that shifted subtly, as if breathing. My eyes struggled to fix upon it, the shape refusing to resolve into anything familiar. It was as if my mind tried to impose Euclidean order onto a thing that fundamentally rejected it. A faint hum, barely perceptible, emanated from it, a vibration that seemed to resonate not in the air, but in the marrow of my bones. "What in the deep is that?" the lead technician breathed, his voice hushed, a tremor running through it. Even the hardened engineer, usually stoic, leaned back, the torch still smoking in his grip, his gaze fixed on the anomaly. A whisper, thin as a spider's silk, brushed against my inner ear. It was not a language I knew, yet it carried an intimation of vastness, of profound indifference. I shook my head, clearing it, attributing the phantom sound to the deep sea pressure and the adrenaline coursing through me. We had been down here for weeks, isolated, pushing ourselves. Fatigue was a deceptive adversary. "Careful," I instructed, my voice perhaps a shade too sharp. "No direct contact. The manipulator arm." Slowly. As the engineer reluctantly extended a robotic arm, its clawed fingers designed for delicate retrieval, a hum from the object intensified, rising in pitch ever so slightly, a subtle vibration that thrummed against the station's metallic skin. The lights flickered, a brief stutter across the main console. The atmospheric regulators coughed, a soft, mechanical gasp, then settled back into their rhythmic whir. A momentary anomaly, I told myself, a power fluctuation. The station was old, after all, resurrected from decades of dormancy. But then, my vision wavered. A gray mist, thick and clinging, began to coalesce at the periphery of my sight, not physically present in the sealed chamber, but undeniably there, a veil drawn across my perception. The metallic bulkhead before me dissolved, replaced by the vague, spectral outlines of ancient stone buildings, their facades shrouded in an impenetrable, damp haze. I was still in the station, but my mind, without warning or consent, saw a different place entirely. The faint, muted bleating of a sheep, or perhaps a distant dog's bark, echoed from beyond the immediate shroud of vapor. It was a foggy village, a place I had never seen, yet it was undeniably there, overlaid upon my reality, a profound intrusion. I blinked hard, rubbing my eyes. The image flickered, the sharp lines of the station briefly reasserting themselves, only to be swallowed again by the encroaching grayness. My heart, which I had believed under firm command, gave a sudden, frantic lurch. This was not fatigue. This was something else. Marcus? You all right? The lead technician asked, his brow furrowed with concern, his voice seeming to cut through the phantom mists with surprising clarity. I forced a smile, a brittle, unconvincing mask. Just a little lightheaded. They spoke of distances unmeasured, of time unspooled, of a truth that was not meant for human minds. The robotic arm, guided by. The engineer's trembling hand, reached the artifact. As its claws prepared to grasp, the hum from the object became a low thrumming vibration that rattled the very floor beneath us. On the main console, a cascade of red alerts flashed, indicating minor system failures across various station modules, environmental controls, auxiliary power, communications. All minor, all seemingly unrelated. The foggy village pressed in, its silent, spectral inhabitants seeming to watch me from the impenetrable mist, their forms indistinct, their intentions unknown. I could almost feel the damp stone against my fingertips, taste the salt on the air. The main console lights flickered, a brief, unsettling stutter across the readouts, mirroring the tremor that ran through the engineer's robotic arm. His hand, sheathed in the articulated claw, hovered inches from the object, a silent argument playing out in the tense lines of his shoulders. It's pulling, the engineer murmured, his voice tight, strained. A resonance. I felt it too, a subtle, almost imperceptible tug, like an ancient current stirring the stagnant waters of my consciousness. My determination, a brittle shield against the unknown, pushed me forward. We had come too far, risked too much, to falter now. This was the core of our mission, the reason we descended into this abyssal realm. With a final, audible gulp, the engineer activated the arm. The claw descended, its fingers closing around the artifact. The hum became a sustained drone, a note held beyond the limits of comfortable hearing, vibrating through the deck plates, through the very air we breathed. A profound, absolute quiet that was somehow more unnerving than the noise. The lights stabilized. The artifact, now cradled gently in the arm's grasp, pulsed with an inner, soft luminescence, a faint, alien glow. Hours later, the station's comms officer, a young woman whose usual composure rarely wavered, burst into the main observation deck. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with a frantic energy I hadn't seen before. Marcus! We're cut off. Surface storm. Massive. They're calling it a cyclonic anomaly. Her words tumbled out, breathless. No satellite link, no acoustic pings, nothing. We're blind. We're alone. The news, though expected given the volatile nature of the trench's surface, landed like a physical blow. Isolation, enforced and absolute. My gaze drifted to the artifact, now secured in a specialized containment field in the central lab. Its soft glow seemed to pulse in time with the distant, muffled roar of the storm raging miles above us, a silent, knowing presence. Over the next few days, the storm raged, a relentless tempest that sealed us in our metallic tomb. The comms officer tried frantically, endlessly, to re-establish contact, her hope visibly eroding with each failed attempt. The engineer grew withdrawn, his movements stiff, his eyes often fixed on some distant, unseen point. And the artifact's influence, I knew, was intensifying. I felt it most acutely. I found myself drawn to the lab, spending increasing stretches of time before the containment field. It wasn't just its form that captivated me, it was the sheer wrongness of its existence, a truth that defied every law of physics I knew. My fingers often brushed the cool, transparent barrier, a desperate yearning to touch the source of this profound disruption. The nightmares began then, not just for me, but for the others. The engineer spoke of endless, crushing pressure, of being buried alive under unimaginable weight. My own dreams, however, were different. They were vivid, disorienting, and profoundly specific. The air was thick, heavy with moisture and the smell of damp earth and something else, something ancient and metallic, like rusted blood. The ground beneath my bare feet was cobbled, slick with an unseen film. I could hear distant, muffled sounds, a bell tolling, perhaps, or a low, mournful sigh carried on an unfelt wind. I'd wake with a gasp, the metallic tang of the dream fog still clinging to my tongue. They were meticulously crafted, tailored. The artifact wasn't merely emanating an influence, it was speaking. Not in words, but in sensations, in images, in emotions, planting these fragmented truths directly into our minds. The artifact wasn't a passive object, it was an active conduit, broadcasting an incomprehensible reality, and we, trapped and isolated, were its unwitting receivers. The news of our absolute isolation, a leaden pronouncement from the surface, pressed down on the station's already heavy air. Its light seemed to beat in time with a distant, muffled echo, a sound I could not quite place, yet felt deeply within the hollows of my skull. The first whispers had been indistinct, like the rustle of dry leaves in a forgotten language, easily dismissed as the station's own deep-sea groans were the phantom echoes of my own weary mind. But now, they clung to the edges of my hearing, a murmuring chorus that seemed to rise from the very metal plates beneath my boots. They spoke of angles that defied description, of colors that burned without light, of a vastness that swallowed the concept of space. I saw them, too, not with my eyes, but with a deeper, more vulnerable part of my perception. Impossible geometries began to overlay the familiar corridors, shimmering briefly like heat haze on a distant road. A bulkhead would warp, its straight lines rippling into an arc that curled back on itself, then snapped back to normalcy before I could fully register the distortion. Others noticed things, too, though their accounts were fractured, less vivid than my own waking visions. Paranoia began to bloom in the sterile confines of Triton Station, a delicate, venomous flower. We began to eye each other, not with suspicion of intent, but with a silent question, "Are you seeing it too?" The lead scientist, her usual meticulous composure fraying, had retreated into her own world of numbers and diagrams. She spent hours hunched over her console, not on our current data, but on intricate, hand-drawn patterns that she scrawled on every available surface. They were not equations, not schematics, but swirling mandalas of dots and lines, repetitive motifs that seemed to echo the impossible geometries I alone perceived. Her eyes, usually sharp and analytical, now held a distant, almost feverish glint. She spoke less, offered only curt, tangential responses, her focus utterly consumed by the strange, unfolding designs. Then, the event arrived for me. I was alone in the central lab, monitoring the artifact's containment field, the soft, rhythmic glow its only companion. The hum, no longer just a distant echo, vibrated through the floor. And then, the station itself began to recede, not physically, but perceptually. The containment field flickered, its light becoming the faint, diffused glow of a distant street lamp. I was no longer in the Mariana Trench. Around me, spectral, hat-formed buildings huddled together, their eaves dripping into the pervasive haze. This was it, the foggy village. It was not a memory, not a dream. It was simply there, superimposed, consuming my vision, indistinct and formless within the mist, seemed to drift between two decaying structures. My breath hitched. A profound, terrifying realization bloomed within me. The artifact was not merely influencing my mind, distorting my senses. It was transposing reality. It was revealing not just an alien truth, but creating an alien truth, grafting it onto our own, layer by insidious layer. We weren't just observing an incomprehensible cosmos, we were being absorbed into it, piece by terrifying piece. I stood, shivering, in the heart of the foggy village, the spectral mist swirling around my knees, no longer sure if the station still existed at all, or if it was merely a memory fading within the encroaching gray. He was a silhouette against the console's soft glow, her fingers tracing phantom geometries on the grimy surfaces of the station. Not equations, no, but sprawling, intricate patterns that spoke of angles unknown, curves that defied Euclidean space. I watched her, a knot tightening in my gut, seeing the meticulous order of her mind unraveling into a new, terrifying symmetry. Her usual crisp commands had dwindled to murmured half-thoughts, lost in the hum of the deep-sea station. My own mind, though assailed by the pervasive hum and the subtle, incessant wrongness that now clung to every surface, refused to break. I clung to purpose, to the cold comfort of analysis. If understanding was the last bastion against the encroaching chaos, then I would excavate it, no matter the cost. The artifact, a silent, obsidian monolith, pulsed with an almost imperceptible resonance from the containment field. It was the source, the heart of this creeping dread. I had to map it, to quantify its impossible form. I activated the gravimetric scanners, the multispectral imager, the quantum resonance probes, instruments designed to pierce the veil of the unknown, yet entirely unprepared for this. The initial data streamed in, a chaotic symphony of anomalous readings. My brow furrowed. The artifact, a simple, smooth obelisk to the naked eye, registered as a shifting, impossible structure in the scanner's field. Its edges were not edges, its surfaces not surfaces, but a constant flux of non-dimensional points, folding in on themselves, yet existing simultaneously outside our spatial understanding. Impossible, I breathed, the word a fragile whisper in the vast, crushing silence of the trench. My fingers flew across the holographic interface, attempting to solidify the data, to force it into a comprehensible model. But it resisted, a stubborn, fundamental refusal to conform to the laws of our universe. They were not sounds, not words, but concepts. I saw, not with my eyes, but with some deeper, unwilling faculty, fleeting glimpses of colossal, indifferent structures, of geometries that mocked the very notion of fixed points. They spoke of vastness, of an emptiness so profound it swallowed light, of processes utterly devoid of meaning or intent as we knew it. My vision blurred, the familiar metallic walls of the station seeming to ripple, to soften at the edges. A dense, unforgiving mist swirled around me, muffling all sound, clinging to my clothes. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. I squeezed my eyes shut, a desperate attempt to banish the intrusion, to reassert the reality I knew. When I opened them, the foggy village had receded, though a faint, lingering dampness seemed to cling to the air within the station. The lead scientist, oblivious to my momentary descent, continued her silent scrawling, her movements now jerky, almost frantic. The impossible geometry, the consistent, yet constantly shifting, energy output, these were hallmarks of design. It was artificial. Crafted, but by whom? And for what purpose? And it was inviting me to look closer, to understand. The invitation felt less like discovery and more like an unraveling. The station's hum, once a steady reassurance, had become a low thrumming inside my skull, a persistent vibration that resonated with the frayed nerves of the crew. Each clang of distant machinery, each whisper of recycled air, felt amplified, distorted. The patterns were not just geometries, they were maps of impossible spaces, constellations that defied the very concept of night sky. Her breath hitched, a thin, reedy sound, and I saw her shoulders tremble. "It's everywhere," she murmured, her voice a brittle whisper. "The mist. Always the fog. And the bell, a mournful clang, just before." We were miles beneath the crushing weight of the ocean, encased in steel and reinforced glass, yet she spoke of a village. A vision, then. I tried to anchor myself, to remember the ocean's black embrace, the hum of the life support, but the image she painted, the foggy village, was disturbingly vivid in my mind's eye. The lead scientist's gaze drifted past me, fixing on a point beyond the bulkhead, beyond even the station itself. Her hand rose, trembling, pointing towards the unseen. "They watch from the windows, Marcus." The blank faces. This was no longer just stress or sleep. Deprivation. This was a fracturing, a splintering of the mind itself. I reached for her arm, my touch meant to ground her, to pull her back to the reality of Triton Station. But as my fingers grazed her sleeve, she recoiled violently, a choked cry escaping her lips. "Don't touch me! You're one of them!" Her eyes, usually intelligent and sharp, were now wild, darting like trapped birds. She stumbled backward, bumping against a control panel, sending a cascade of alarms blaring through the chamber. From the adjacent chamber, the lead technician burst in, his face drawn, his eyes bloodshot. "What in blazes is going on? We're losing primary power to Sector Gamma." He shouted over the din, his voice strained with exhaustion and fear. She pointed a trembling finger at the blinking lights of the console, at the very controls that governed our existence down here. "It's a trap. The lights, their eyes. They're watching us from the village." She lunged, not at me, but at the console, her hands flailing wildly, striking keys and levers with desperate, unthinking force. The technician cried out, "No! Stop! You'll destabilize the subarray." He moved to restrain her, a clumsy, desperate grab. My mind, usually quick to assess and react, was caught in a horrifying slow-motion reel. The technician, his movements hampered by the confined space and the blaring alarms, struggled to grab her. Her elbow connected with his jaw, a sickening crack that I felt more than heard. He stumbled back, momentarily stunned, his hands flying to his face. Sparks erupted, a shower of angry, blue-white light illuminating her contorted features. The air filled with the acrid scent of ozone and burning plastic. The alarms intensified, changing pitch, a frantic, desperate wail. The lights in the chamber flickered, dimmed, then surged with a dangerous intensity. There was a sudden, violent shudder that vibrated through the entire station, a metallic groan of protest. "The pressure seals," the technician shrieked, his voice choked with panic. He pointed a shaking finger at a display that now flashed crimson, a series of catastrophic readings scrolling across the screen. She's compromised the auxiliary intake. The outer hull. It won't hold. Before any of us could react, before I could even formulate a command, the lead scientist let out a guttural, inhuman scream. He was off balance, already reeling from the blow to his jaw, and the push sent him stumbling backwards, not into the wall, but towards the open conduit panel he had just ripped apart. His foot caught on a loose cable. He fell, a clumsy, terrible plummet. His head struck the exposed, sparking wiring with a sickening thud. The alarms had died, extinguished by the short circuit. Only the distant, rhythmic thrum of the station's core remained, a dull, indifferent beat. I stood there, my breath caught in my throat, watching. The lead technician lay motionless, his body slumped against the exposed wiring, a wisp of smoke curling from his hair. A life, extinguished in an instant, not by a monstrous entity, but by the insidious erosion of sanity. My gaze drifted from the technician's still form to the lead scientist, then to the console, and finally, to the faint, almost imperceptible shimmer that still emanated from the artifact in the research bay beyond. It pulsed, a silent, indifferent beacon of revelation. This was not an accident. This was an inevitable consequence, a logical progression. The universe, in its incomprehensible truth, was simply pruning. And we, the fragile vessels of human reason, were merely the branches. The technician lay prone on the grating, a crimson bloom spreading on the cold metal beneath his head. I moved, a blur of motion born of pure, desperate instinct, snatching her arm, yanking her back before he could strike again. She fought with surprising ferocity, a guttural snarl tearing from her throat, her eyes wide and unseeing, fixed on something I couldn't perceive. "Secure her!" I barked, my voice raw. The operations officer, pale and shaking, fumbled with a restraint kit. We kept for emergency medical situations. It felt grotesque, strapping down a colleague, but her strength was inhuman, her rationality gone. Her struggles were silent now, punctuated only by shudders that racked her entire frame, a constant, low moan escaping her lips. I knelt beside the technician. His breathing was shallow, a faint wheeze escaping his bruised mouth. "Get him to the medical bay," I ordered, the words feeling hollow even as I spoke them. The comms officer, usually a steady presence, merely stared, his face ashen. We were three now, myself, the operations officer, and the comms officer, and the artifact. Always the artifact, humming its silent, insidious song from the secure chamber. Sleep, when it finally claimed me hours later, was not a release but an invasion. This was a foggy village, its ancient stone buildings huddled together, their windows like vacant eyes. No birds sang, no wind stirred the skeletal trees that lined the narrow, winding paths. A profound sense of wrongness permeated the very fabric of the place. The angles of the roofs seemed to shift, subtly, impossibly, when I wasn't looking directly at them. Then I saw them. It was the sound of a universe unfolding, indifferent, colossal, and utterly unknowable. My mind reeled, trying to grasp what I was seeing, what I was feeling. It was a truth, not spoken but impressed directly upon my consciousness, that we were less than dust, less than a fleeting thought, in a cosmos governed by forces beyond any human comprehension or care. Our existence was a momentary spark, easily extinguished, utterly meaningless. The village was a fragile construct, a fleeting dream, against the backdrop of this crushing, indifferent reality. My throat constricted, a cry trapped behind my teeth. The familiar confines of my bunk felt alien, the steel walls too thin, too fragile. My head throbbed with an insistent, crushing pain that felt like something was trying to pry my skull open. My eyes burned, as if they had stared directly into an impossible light. I pushed myself up, my limbs heavy, sluggish. The air in the station, usually sterile and recycled, now carried a faint, metallic tang, like old blood and electricity. A crimson bloom, stark against the cold grating, spread beneath the technician's head. The lead scientist, her face a mask of contorted fury and something ancient, something far colder, still stood over him, trembling. Her breath hitched, ragged and wet, a sound like a rusted hinge groaning open. I moved, a blur of motion born of pure, unthinking instinct, but not towards her, not towards the fallen. My steps carried me away, a desperate pivot from the unfolding horror. Accusations, sharp as broken glass, flew between them. "You knew," the engineer shrieked, his voice cracking, pointing a trembling finger at the communications specialist. "You saw the readouts, the energy spikes. You kept us here." The specialist, a woman whose calm demeanor had always been her anchor, now trembled like a leaf in a gale. "Lies. It was your modification, your bypass. You let it in." Her eyes, wide and bloodshot, darted to the lead scientist, then to me, then back to the engineer, searching for a scapegoat, a shared enemy to rally against. There was none, only the fracturing shards of their own minds. Their fear, their blame, was a contagion. I watched, detached, as the engineer, his face blotchy with rage, lunged for the main power conduit. Sparks showered, a brief, blinding display, as he tore at the protective casing, his fingers ripping through wiring with a frantic, animalistic strength. Life support. "Better to die than to let it consume us," he roared back, his eyes wild, utterly lost. He wasn't speaking to her, or to me. He was speaking to the unseen, to the encroaching truth. I saw the communications specialist, her hands shaking, snatch a utility knife from a nearby workbench. She didn't advance on the engineer. Instead, she turned to the sealed food stores, slashing through the reinforced nutrient pouches, a thin, green gruel oozing onto the floor. Sabotage. Pure, unadulterated self-destruction. Their minds, once sharp instruments of science, were now blunted, weaponized against their own survival. There was no reasoning with them, no pulling them back from the precipice. The artifact's influence, a subtle poison, had seeped into every corner of their beings, twisting their logic, turning their fears inward. I was alone, truly alone, amidst the wreckage of their sanity. Yet, beneath it, a different current stirred. A pull. Irresistible, magnetic, it tugged at the very core of my being, drawing me towards the artifact's chamber. It wasn't a thought, not a decision, but an instinct, primal and absolute. I turned from the escalating chaos, from the screams and the tearing of metal, and walked. The fluorescent lights, flickering erratically, elongated into impossibly tall, narrow windows, through which I saw not the crushing black of the deep, but a swirling, impenetrable mist. The hum of machinery faded, replaced by the distant, mournful tolling of a bell, echoing across what felt like vast, open spaces. The air, once recycled and sterile, grew heavy with the scent of damp earth and something ancient, something like decaying stone. My boots, no longer sounding on metal grating, now scraped against rough, uneven cobblestones. The corridor had vanished. The mist swirled around my knees, clinging to me with an icy grip. It was impossible. Triton Station, miles beneath the ocean's surface, could not transform into this. Yet, it was undeniably real to my senses. The metallic bulkheads had become weathered stone, the sleek, modern lines of the station replaced by the haphazard, time-worn architecture of a place forgotten by the modern world. I walked on, compelled, the bells tolling growing louder, leading me deeper into the labyrinthine alleys. The artifact, I knew, was at the heart of this place. It was no longer a chamber within a research station. It was the ancient, silent core of this spectral settlement, the source of this profound, unsettling transformation. Around a bend, the alley opened into a small, desolate square. They were not symbols I recognized, but they spoke to a part of my mind that had no language, only recognition. This was not merely a non-Euclidean object, it was a doorway, a conduit, and its truth was not just a revelation, but a complete, terrifying resculpting of reality itself. The station wasn't warping, it had been rewritten. The communications specialist, her form a trembling silhouette against the emergency lights, didn't advance. Her hand, gripped around the utility knife, shook with an almost rhythmic tremor. She wasn't looking at the research lead, whose wild roar still echoed, nor at me. He was looking into the fabric of the perceived world, and finding it wanting. Then, with a strangled gasp that was more air than sound, she brought the blade down, not towards the research lead, but into the thick, insulated power conduit snaking along the floor beside her. A shower of sparks erupted, a brief, violent blossoming of incandescent light that swallowed the shadows for a fractured second. The station groaned, power flickering precariously, then settling into a dimmer, more guttural hum. She dropped the knife, her body slumping, not in defeat, but in a sudden, profound exhaustion, as if that singular act had drained her very essence. The research lead, still roaring, still lost, seemed not to notice, his gaze still fixed on the unseen horror. I felt a strange, cold clarity bloom within me. The desperate, frantic attempts at resistance, the scientific detachment, the clinging to logic, it all seemed utterly futile, a child's game against an ocean. The truth it offered was not to be fought, but absorbed. My legs, heavy with the phantom weight of deep-sea pressure, carried me. Each step was a deliberate act, not of will, but of surrender. The research lead's raving faded into a dull drone behind me. The communications specialist lay inert, a discarded doll. My focus narrowed, tunneling, until the only thing that mattered was the impossible geometry, the silent, beckoning hum of the artifact. As I approached the containment field, the polished steel of the chamber walls began to ripple. Not physically, but in my perception. The hard angles softened, the metallic sheen dulled, replaced by the damp, moss-eaten stone of ancient dwellings. The hum of the life support systems transformed into the distant bleating of unseen livestock, the creak of unseen timbers. The mist, thick and cloying, swirled around unseen structures, muffling all sounds save for the persistent, internal thrum of the artifact. Cobblestones, slick with perpetual damp, stretched before me, vanishing into the opalescent haze. I could almost feel the rough wool of a cloak against my skin, hear the murmur of incomprehensible words on the wind. Yet, my hands still traced the cool, smooth surface of the containment field, my eyes still saw the impossible angles of the artifact within, even as the village pressed in, blurring the edges of my reality. My fingers, no longer steady, found the stylus and datapad I had dropped earlier. A compulsion, primal and urgent, seized me. Lines erupted across the screen, not the neat, ordered schematics of Triton Station, nor the calculated vectors of geological strata. These were impossible geometries, interwoven with glyphs that shifted and reformed even as I drew them, diagrams that defied perspective and spatial logic. Each stroke was a revelation, a fragment of the truth pouring through me, onto the digital canvas. The folds connect, I heard myself murmur, the words thick and unfamiliar on my tongue, like stones in my mouth. Not space. Not time. But unwound. My voice was hoarse, alien. It was a new language, born of incomprehension, yet perfectly clear to the part of me that was now fully engaged with the artifact. My vision flickered, the sterile glow of the station merging with the perpetual twilight of the foggy village. I began to sketch furiously, ignoring the throbbing ache in my temples, the dryness of my throat. The datapad's battery indicator blinked red, but I paid it no mind. The lines I drew were not merely representations, they were the truth, tangible and immediate. They showed how the village, this illusion, was not separate from the station, but merely another facet of its deeper reality, a reflection of the artifact's pervasive influence. The containment field, I realized, was not holding it in, but holding us out. It sees between. My hand, trembling with exertion and revelation, etched a symbol that seemed to shift and writhe, a knot of impossible dimensions. The truth was not a fact to be learned, but a state of being to be entered. And I was entering it, irrevocably. The scientific pretense, the careful analysis, was a forgotten dream. There was only the artifact, and the infinite, terrifying expanse of its singular focus. The alien language, which had burst forth from my throat moments ago, still resonated in the hollows of my skull, a sound both foreign and intimately familiar, a truth I now instinctively understood, though my conscious mind recoiled from its implications. The metallic walls of the corridor began to breathe. Not a subtle undulation, but a profound, impossible warping. Corners softened into curves, then sharpened into angles that defied Euclidean geometry. The polished floor rippled like disturbed water, reflecting my distorted image back at me, a gaunt stranger with eyes too wide, too ancient. I reached out, my fingers brushing against what should have been cold, unyielding metal, but it felt porous, like damp stone, then slick, like wet skin. The deep-sea pressure, once a constant, external weight, transformed into an internal crush. It pressed not on my body, but on the delicate architecture of my thoughts, flattening them, making coherence a struggle. Each breath was an effort against this invisible, mental density. My determination, however, remained a stubborn ember in the encroaching gloom. I had to fight. A wall directly ahead of me, where a moment ago a pressured door had stood, dissolved. It didn't open or vanish, but simply ceased to be a solid barrier. In its place, a gray mist swirled, dense and pearlescent, swallowing the harsh station lights. I stumbled forward, drawn by an impossible curiosity, my hand still outstretched. The mist coalesced, not into the continuation of a corridor, but into a narrow lane paved with uneven cobblestones. To either side, low, leaning houses emerged from the perpetual twilight, their thatched roofs slumped, their windows like vacant, staring eyes. I was in a foggy village. The realization struck me with the force of a physical blow, yet it was not entirely shocking. A part of me, the part that now understood the artifact's language, simply accepted this impossible displacement. This was the truth, unvarnished and brutal, my reality had shattered, and this village, born of incomprehension, was the consequence. The fog clung to everything, muffling sound, blurring outlines. Shapes moved at the periphery of my vision, indistinct figures that seemed to float with the mist itself, never quite solidifying. Was it the wind rustling through unseen trees, or the soft tread of unseen feet? This place felt ancient, forgotten, existing outside the boundaries of time and logic. The pressure on my mind intensified, morphing from the deep-sea crush into the suffocating atmosphere of the village itself. It was as if the very air here was thick with unspoken histories, with the weight of countless forgotten lives. I looked back, desperate for a glimpse of the metallic corridor, for any anchor to the reality I had known. But there was only the swirling gray and impenetrable veil that had swallowed the station whole. My chest tightened. A desperate, primal urge to scream clawed at my throat, but no sound escaped. This was not a dream. This was not madness, not in the way I understood it. This was the raw, unvarnished truth, revealed by the artifact, manifested in this impossible foggy village. I was here. The station was gone. And the indifferent cosmos watched, unblinking, as my essence unraveled. Then, the shimmer solidified, coalescing into something entirely different, something utterly impossible. The oppressive weight of the deep ocean dissolved, replaced by a damp chill that clung to my skin. My boots, moments ago planted on a grated floor, now sank slightly into mud. Around me, the familiar, angular geometry of the Triton Station dissolved into soft, indistinct shapes. I stood in a narrow, cobbled lane, the air thick with an impenetrable fog that muffled every sound, turning the world into a canvas of muted gray. This was the foggy village. A profound silence pressed in, broken only by the drip of unseen water from eaves and the distant, mournful cry of a bird I couldn't place. I reached out a hand, watching it disappear into the swirling vapor just inches from my face. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. The artifact, a silent, unseen presence, had done this. It had torn the fabric of my perceived reality and rewoven it into this spectral place. A low, guttural murmur drifted through the fog, too indistinct to be words, too close to be dismissed. My head snapped around, straining to pierce the milky veil. Nothing. Just the endless, suffocating gray. My heart thrummed a frantic rhythm against my ribs, a desperate counterpoint to the quiet horror. I was determined, though. This was the threshold. This was the test. A faint light, an oily yellow smudge, materialized in the distance, suggesting a structure, a window, a hidden life. I moved towards it, each step an act of defiance against the blurring boundaries of my mind. The cobbled path twisted, revealing glimpses of sagging timber frames, roofs bowed under centuries of rain. The houses leaned into each other like ancient conspirators, their secrets buried deep in the perpetual mist. As I neared the light, a figure emerged from the fog, a silhouette without features, neither tall nor short, simply there. It stood motionless, facing away from me, seemingly contemplating the swirling. Nothingness. No sound. No movement. Just a presence, an unblinking gaze I felt on my back even though it faced away. My breath hitched. Then, a low hum began, not from the figure, but from within me, a resonance that vibrated through my skull, through my very bones. It was the artifact, calling to me, its presence growing stronger, more insistent, even here in this illusory village. The yellow smudge of light intensified, growing into a searing white beacon that pulsed with an unbearable clarity. The world around me began to unravel. The cobbled lane buckled, the timber houses blurred and stretched, their angles warping into impossible curves. The figure in the fog, still facing away, began to distort, its form elongating, thinning, then collapsing into a mere ripple in the air. The hum intensified, becoming a roar inside my head, yet it was a silent roar, a sound perceived directly by my mind, bypassing my ears. It was a torrent, a deluge of pure information, not in words or images, but in fundamental patterns, relationships, and truths that tore through the conceptual frameworks of my entire existence. My brain screamed, stretched beyond its limits, trying to contain the sheer volume of it. I saw the universe not as a collection of stars and planets, but as an intricate, indifferent tapestry woven from threads I could barely perceive. I saw the true scale of things, not merely in distance, but in being, in a hierarchy of existence that dwarfed humanity to an unimaginable insignificance. My sense of self, my memories, my understanding of cause and effect, even the very notion of time, all shattered, reassembled, then shattered again, into a kaleidoscope of terrifying, liberating insight. My knees buckled. There was no beginning, no end, only the vast, undeniable isness of everything, an interconnectedness so profound it rendered individual consciousness a fleeting, meaningless spark. The truth wasn't a secret to be uncovered, it was the fundamental nature of reality itself, a reality utterly alien to human perception, indifferent to our struggles, our hopes, our very existence. When I finally registered the sensation of solid ground beneath me, the foggy village was gone. The sterile glow of the Triton Station had returned, but it was no longer merely a light. It pulsed with the same silent roar that echoed in my mind. The air shimmered, not with heat, but with the residue of a million shattered perceptions. I saw the station, my colleagues, my own reflection in the polished steel, but I saw them through a new lens, a lens that revealed the fragile, illusory nature of all things. I was connected. And I was broken. But the tremor was not of fear, nor of cold. It was a resonance, a deep, harmonic hum that settled into the marrow, reshaping the very contours of my perception. My vision no longer flickered as a faulty bulb might, it shimmered, yes, but not with heat. It pulsed with an unseen current, revealing the hidden sinews of reality, the true, flowing geometry beneath the crude angles of human construction. It was a vein, a channel for currents I now understood. And within that current, images coalesced, ephemeral as smoke, yet undeniable. Before me, the rigid lines of the bulkhead softened, diffused into a hazy gray. The metallic floor beneath my boots grew slick, yielding, like ancient cobblestones worn smooth by ceaseless footfall. My hand, reaching out, felt not the cool, unyielding panel, but the rough, damp stone of a crumbling wall. I was in a village, a place perpetually shrouded in mist, where the sea's breath was a constant, mournful companion. The fog hung heavy, muffling the world, blurring the distinction between land and water, between solid ground and endless sky. I could hear the distant, mournful cry of unseen gulls, the soft, rhythmic lapping of waves against an unseen shore. This was not a memory, nor a dream. It was now. The station had not vanished, it was merely overlaid, its mundane reality thinned to translucence by the profound clarity of my altered sight. The true structure, the one that sang the artifact's silent truth, was the foggy village. Its lanes were the conduits, its crumbling structures the support beams, its pervasive mist the very medium through which the station's purpose would now flow. A low thrum emanating from the central power conduit vibrated through the cobblestones and up into my frame. It was a call, a directive. My hands, no longer merely appendages of flesh and bone, felt a profound knowing. They understood the language of wires, the silent conversation of circuits. I moved with a grace that was not my own, a purpose both ancient and utterly new. I found the chief engineer, hunched over a diagnostics panel, his brow furrowed with a human concern for failing systems. He spoke of power fluctuations, of failing redundancies. His words were a discordant jumble, a static interference in the clear signal I now received. I saw him not as a man, but as a component, a knot of biological resistance in the larger flow. His anxieties, his human limitations, were an inefficiency. "Marcus, the main reactor's spiking," the chief engineer murmured, his voice tight with strain. "We're losing containment on auxiliary power. If we don't reroute, we risk a full system collapse." I watched his mouth move, heard the meaningless sounds. His eyes, clouded with worry, sought a connection, a shared understanding. But there was no shared understanding. His reality was a fragile construct, a fleeting illusion. Mine was the bedrock beneath it. The chief engineer called out, his voice sharp with alarm, but I paid him no mind. His panic was a tiny eddy in the vast current. My fingers, guided by an impulse beyond thought, reached for a series of control interfaces. They were not marked with human labels, but with the shimmering glyphs of the artifact's truth, visible only to me. With a precise, almost surgical motion, I began to reconfigure the station's energy grid. Not to stabilize it, not to save it from collapse, but to transform it. The chief engineer shouted something then, a strangled cry of disbelief. "What are you doing? You're tearing it apart." But I was not tearing it apart. I was rebuilding. I was aligning the station's very bones to a new resonance, a new purpose. The primary power conduit, once a simple artery, now pulsed with a complex, rhythmic beat, like a monstrous heart. I bypassed safety protocols, not out of recklessness, but because they were irrelevant, designed for a reality that no longer held sway. I rerouted auxiliary power, not to backup systems, but to a previously inert chamber, a space I now perceived as the very nexus of the foggy village, its hidden wellspring. The station groaned around me, a symphony of protesting metal and overstressed machinery. Lights flickered, not with a dying gasp, but with a vibrant, accelerating pulse. The very air grew dense, charged with an energy that tasted of ozone and ancient dust. He was a ghost in the machine I was repurposing. As I completed the final connection, a low, resonant hum filled the station, deeper and more profound than any sound I had ever known. It was the sound of the artifact, amplified, channeled, and given voice through the very structure of Triton. The air shimmered, and the outlines of the foggy village sharpened, its ancient stones and perpetually damp lanes now almost perfectly superimposed upon the station's interior. The metallic tang of the station was replaced by the briny scent of a hidden coast. I saw the true purpose of the conduits, not as power lines, but as pathways for a different kind of truth, flowing from the artifact's heart to reshape all that was. My work was not done, but it had begun. The station was no longer a human outpost. It was an instrument, a conduit, a vessel. I was beyond human, and the station, under my touch, was becoming something else entirely. The fog, a living shroud, clung to the skeletal trees that lined the periphery of the foggy village. The cobblestones beneath my worn boots were slick with perpetual damp, reflecting the dull glow of what I knew to be the primary conduit, now an arterial vein of pure, unfettered insight, pulsating through the heart of this weathered place. I stood on the crumbling dock, its timbers groaning like old bones, gazing out into the milky expanse where the sea met the sky in an indistinct blur. The village, a collection of hunched, gray structures, seemed to breathe with me, its silence punctuated only by the whisper of the tide and the occasional, almost imperceptible tremor that ran through the ground. They called it a village, these ignorant echoes in my mind, but I knew it for what it truly was, the final chamber, the nexus where the great work would at last be unveiled. Then, a foreign tremor. Not the familiar, deep hum of the conduit, but a different vibration, a dull thrumming that grew, cutting through the thick silence. It was an aberration, a dissonance in the grand symphony I had composed. Through the spectral curtain of the fog, a faint, rhythmic pulse of light began to bloom, a sickly yellow against the gray. A vessel. A rescue vessel, perhaps, or a survey ship, its presence an affront to the delicate balance I had achieved. They came, always, seeking to reclaim, to understand with their limited senses, to cage the infinite within their pathetic definitions. A slow, deliberate smile stretched across my face, a movement that felt alien yet utterly right. My muscles, once taut with the strain of their former purpose, now moved with a fluid grace, a testament to the new architecture of my form. They would come, yes. And they would see. They would feel. The thrumming intensified, a dull, mechanical heartbeat that grated against the profound rhythm of the village. The yellow light resolved into a pair of powerful beams, slicing through the mist, illuminating the churning water at the vessel's bow. It was larger than I expected, a sturdy patrol craft, its silhouette slowly emerging from the obscurity, a blunt instrument against the ethereal canvas. I could make out figures on its deck now, indistinct shapes moving with an urgency I found quaint. They were so small, so utterly unprepared. Marcus? A voice, tinny and distorted, crackled from a handheld speaker on the vessel's deck. It was the voice of a colleague, I vaguely recalled, though the name, the face, had long since dissolved into the greater current of understanding. Marcus Blake, do you copy? This is the Vanguard. We've received your distress beacon. Respond, Marcus. Distress beacon. The words were like pebbles rattling in an empty jar. There had been no distress. Only an awakening. My fingers, nimble and precise, danced across the makeshift interface, not pressing buttons, but coaxing currents, shaping the raw energy that pulsed beneath the dock. I needed to share. Not with words, for words were cages, but with the pure, unadulterated essence of what I had become. The conduit, the monstrous heart, throbbed beneath my feet, its rhythm quickening, synchronizing with the approaching vessel's clumsy pulse. The figures on the deck of the Vanguard froze. Their yellow lights wavered, momentarily flickering as if uncertain. I saw one of them, a security officer, raise a comms unit to their ear, their posture rigid with alarm. They were trying to make sense of the cacophony I was broadcasting, trying to fit it into their limited framework of understanding. It was beautiful, their struggle so futile. I intensified the output. The air around me grew thick, shimmering with an unseen force. The sound I emitted grew in complexity, a multitonal chord that vibrated through the bones, a symphony of incomprehension. It was the sound of the universe unmaking itself, of reality fraying at the edges, of the truth pouring into their fragile minds. On the vessel, the security officer stumbled back, dropping their comms unit. Another, a communications specialist, clutched at their head, their face contorted in a silent scream. Their lights flickered again, more violently this time, and the vessel's engines sputtered, a ragged cough against the rising tide of my revelation. They were trying to retreat, to escape the purity of the signal. But it was too late. The truth, once perceived, could not be unseen. My own voice, or what passed for it, rose in pitch, a triumphant shriek that tore at the fabric of the night. It was not a sound of pain, but of joyous, terrible enlightenment. I was not speaking to them, I was speaking through them, bypassing their ears, their minds, going straight for the core of their being. The vessel began to drift, its navigation apparently failing, turning slowly in the water, its lights dimming, one by one, like dying stars. They were receiving the message. They were understanding, in the only way possible. And soon, they too would be ready to rebuild. The distress beacon, a fractured song of static and a phantom hum, pulsed from the console I had wrestled into being. Rotting planks, barnacled metal, and shards of sea-worn glass, salvaged from the skeletal remains of the foggy village, formed its crude architecture. Around me, the mist hung heavy, a shroud damp with salt and the faint, sweet scent of decay. My fingers, calloused and stained with rust, traced the cold, rough surface of the makeshift screen, a window to nowhere, or everywhere, depending on the shifting currents of my mind. I had awaited them. The others. Not with fear, but with a strange, quiet certainty, like watching a tide inevitably turn. The air, already thick with the ocean's breath, began to thrum, a low, resonant vibration that I felt not in my ears, but deep in the marrow of my bones. It was the artifact, singing its silent song, announcing its presence to those who dared approach. Through the shifting veil of fog, shapes began to coalesce. Heavy-suited figures, their lamps cutting feeble tunnels in the gray, advanced from the shoreline. The crunch of their boots on the shingle was unnaturally loud, each step a hammer blow against the village's profound quiet. I saw the lead investigator, his face grim behind the visor of his helmet, and a communication specialist, her movements precise, almost mechanical. They were real, or at least, their forms were. But the truth they carried, the truth of their arrival, felt as flimsy as the mist itself. Marcus Blake? The investigator's voice, filtered through a calm unit, was a distorted echo, a question stretched thin across an impossible distance. We received your signal. Triton Station. What happened? I looked at him, truly looked, and saw the edges of his form begin to waver. Not a blurring, but a subtle, geometric impossibility. A line that should have been straight now curved inward, a shadow that clung to him with an unnatural tenacity. A high-pitched whine, imperceptible to my ears but clearly agonizing to hers, emanated from her. The fog itself seemed to thicken, not with more moisture, but with a palpable presence. I saw the lead investigator's gaze drift from me, past me, to the console, and then further, to the very air. His words became disjointed. The readings. Anomalous. Beyond. Beyond anything. He trailed off, his hand lifting slowly, pointing towards the sea, then to the sky, then back to me, his gesture losing all coherence. His eyes, fixed on something unseen, mirrored a cosmos of indifferent truth. He saw it, I knew. He saw the spaces between the spaces, the angles that defied measure, the grand, terrible indifference of existence. The communication specialist, now slumped to her knees, was muttering. Not words, but sequences of sounds, like a broken phonograph skipping across a forgotten tune. Her eyes were unfocused, staring into the swirling gray, her body trembling as if caught in an unseen gale. The investigator, still standing, was changing. His posture, once rigid with authority, softened, melted, then began to contort. His uniform seemed to ripple, the fabric shifting in impossible patterns. He was no longer looking at me, or the village, or the ocean. He was looking through everything, his gaze fixed on the ultimate, unvarnished reality that the artifact had so generously provided. A profound, silent understanding bloomed on his face, followed by a quiet, devastating despair. He dropped his comb unit, and it shattered on the shingle, a pathetic clatter against the rising hum. They were not retreating. They were dissolving. Their minds, their very selves, were being unmade, not by force, but by revelation. The truth, so vast and terrible, was too much for the fragile architecture of human sanity. The engineer, shrieking now, clawed at his own face, tearing its skin as if trying to rip away the vision imprinted behind his eyes. The lead investigator, his eyes now perfectly blank, his face serene in its emptiness, turned and walked slowly towards the turbulent gray of the ocean, his steps even and deliberate. The fog swallowed him whole, a silent, final embrace. I stood by my console, the salvaged debris now feeling like an extension of my own fragmented will. The distress beacon, its purpose fulfilled, sputtered and died. The foggy village remained, a silent witness. Triton Station, or what it had become, was here. Not a place of steel and pressure, but a crucible of consciousness. The artifact, deep beneath the shifting sands of perception, pulsed. And I, Marcus Blake, was part of its rhythm now, a note in its endless, indifferent song. My fate was not a question of life or death, but of integration.